There are tons of books and Instagram accounts too, chock full of inspirational quotes to live by. And there's nothing wrong with any of that. But what I'm interested in talking about today are quotes to work by. I'm Mike Quackenbush. This is Till We Make It. And here on my channel, I make videos for professional wrestlers at every stage of their journey. In your rookie years, in the heat of the battle, or a seasoned pro in the autumn of your career, I make videos for you. And in my own career, I've been very fortunate. I've worked in front of the cameras as a pro wrestler, referee, commentator, and ring announcer. And I've worked behind the scenes too, as a promoter, booker, agent, coach, and consultant. And today what I want to share with you are 4 quotes that I work by, 3 by really influential people, and a 4th one too. So as I offer you this first one, I also want to set the record straight because I used to misquote this frequently. I did it on podcasts, in interviews, and even in speeches that I gave. I used to say, "Great artists ship," and that is not what Steve Jobs said. What he said was, "Real artists ship." You may know this was something he scrawled up on the board back in the 80s when the Macintosh computer was running behind schedule. And depending whose anecdote you happen to be listening to at that time, the Macintosh computer might have been weeks behind schedule. According to other people, it was months behind schedule, or in some extreme cases, 2 years behind schedule. And apparently, as the story goes, on one Friday afternoon, the team told Steve Jobs it would once again be pushing into the next week. And he wrote up on the board, "Real artists ship." Now, can I tell you exactly what Steve Jobs meant about real artists ship? No, I can't. For some reason, he's not answering my emails anymore. But I can tell you what this means to me and how it impacts the way that I work. To me, real artists ship means you got to turn your creative thinking into creative doing every single day, or you will never have something to ship. Whatever it is that you produce. Do you make professional wrestling? Do you make sculptures? Do you make music? Whatever that thing is that you produce, you will never actually get it out into the world if you don't convert your creative thinking into creative doing. A second meaning I've extracted from Steve Jobs' message to the Apple development team is this. At some point, you do have to ship. You must end the process of revision, editing, tweaking. All of that must come to an end. It must be finite in its nature so that whatever the end product is goes out into the world, because real artists ship even when they know this isn't perfect. Because making something which is 100% perfect and pleasing to its creator is a virtually impossible task. And if you hold yourself adherent to that standard at all times, you will never have the courage to push your baby out into the world. And you must, because as Steve Jobs said, real artists ship. Just between you and me, I'm not a big Steve Jobs devotee. As Bill Burr has often joked, there are people who see him as nerd god, and I am not one of those. But I have read a couple books covering his life and his career, at least one of which actually got made into a movie a couple of years ago, and I do believe this about Steve Jobs. He was a brilliant visionary who changed the way that we think and interface with technology on a day-to-day basis. And Steve Jobs, he's a deeply polarizing figure. If you read the accounts of people who knew him and worked with him, you're going to hear stories from all over the spectrum, and most of them tend to agree on this. He was not particularly suave and was certainly a little bit lacking when it came to social graces. But I think if that's what we had to put up with for the sake of everything he's contributed to our daily lives, and even just that one quote and the way it's impacted the way that I work on a day-to-day basis, well, then I happen to think it was more than worth it. The idea that real artists ship resonates very deeply with me and reminds me that some of those projects that are just gathering dust, they are worth picking back up, dusting them off, and getting them to the point that they are ready to go and meet the world. And I want to encourage you to do the same. If if you've put a lot of work and passion into a project of yours and it hasn't reached that point yet, do not consign it to some cobwebby corner in the basement of your mind. Get that thing ready to go and meet the world, because real artists ship. The second quote to work by that I want to share with you comes from the great podcaster and author, Todd Henry. He's the author of The Motivation Code and Herding Tigers, and he is also the podcast host of The Accidental Creative. And I know I've name-dropped him on this channel before. I even quoted him in my book, 7 Keys to Becoming a Better Performer. And Todd Henry says this: cover bands don't change the world. Don't be a cover band. Find your own unique voice. To fully appreciate the wisdom of Todd Henry's quote, you gotta know what a cover band is. Back in an era when people left their houses, cover bands would play at bars or taverns, usually on the weekend. And it would be a group of people who played mostly songs by other artists. They covered other musicians' work. And the original material that they brought to the table was scant. It was minimal. They were chiefly purveyors of other people's material. All facetiousness aside, cover bands do still exist. You should check this out. It's amazing. In the early days of his long-running podcast, The Accidental Creative, Todd Henry recounted this true fact. No cover band has ever scored a #1 hit on the Billboard charts. They haven't. No cover band in existence. And that's what he means by cover bands don't change the world. And so he encourages all of us as creative pros to not just resign ourselves to cover band status, but to find our own unique voice and create from that point of view. Here is what Todd Henry's quote has come to mean to me. I really do believe that as creative pros, we end up as the sum of all of our influences after we put them through a process of being combined and synthesized into something new that is produced by the vessel of us, the creative professional. We are not simply an imitation of our influences. And even the way I define the job of being a creative pro is derived from the work of Todd himself. He says that a creative pro is anyone who must constantly convert their creativity into value to make a living. And that definitely applies to all of us as professional wrestlers. The third quote that I work by and want to share with you comes from another somewhat polarizing figure. I first heard his single, The More You Ignore Me, The Closer I Get, in February of 1994. I was in high school at the time, and like any diligent high school student in a pre-internet age, suddenly fascinated by a pop star, I thought, I want to find out everything about Morrissey. And so I started looking at the library through any periodical that had an interview with Morrissey in it. And that is where I first heard this. I wish I could tell you the exact source, but I don't remember. I do remember these words: never kneel at the altar of conformity. Real quick, if for some reason the work of Morrissey is only landing on your radar because of this video, I want to encourage you to explore the stuff he did in the 80s as part of the Smiths with Johnny Marr, and also his vast solo catalog. And now that I'm saying this, let's put a link up there. You should check it out. I don't know that I appreciated it until just now how many parallels there are between Steve Jobs and Morrissey. At different times during his career, Morrissey has been described as abrasive, truculent, and miserable. But you know what's never in question? His brilliance. And if you listen to anecdotes from people who have known and worked with Morrissey over the years, well, you hear this wide-ranging spectrum of experiences which could be considered deeply polarizing, just like Steve Jobs. Never kneel at the altar of conformity took root in my life when I was still a teenager, and it still influences the way that I work on a day-to-day basis. It means so much to me, I actually gave that title to a Chikara event years ago. There will be people that want you to conform to their expectations of your behavior, of your speech. They will say, you can't dress this way, you can't create in that way, you can't give voice to these types of opinions, you must conform to our way of doing things. Don't. Never kneel at the altar of conformity. I want to share with you what this has come to mean to me over the years. It means you must learn to follow your own compass. Ask yourself, what does my heart, what does my head tell me to do? And then do that. When we don't, we are not being true to ourselves. You're allowing yourself to be bullied, intimidated, or frightened into doing what other people think instead of following your own star. But don't fall into that trap. Never kneel at the altar of conformity. So I wanted to front load this with impactful quotes from influential people. And before I move on, if you're passionate about professional wrestling and you want to continue to learn more about the craft in all of its wild and wacky facets, then please consider joining my community over on Patreon. There, you'll get exclusive videos, early access to Till We Make It videos, things like podcasts, essays, excerpts from my books, and unreleased material that you won't get anywhere else. And we'd love to have you. Last but not least, a fourth quote. This one is one of my own. Never underestimate your ability to improvise. Trust that in the moment, you have the experience, the knowledge, and the resources around you to be able to survey the battlefield, and no matter how chaotic it appears in that moment, you will be able to discern a path to victory. Despite being someone who loves being well prepared, I can tell you beyond a shadow of a doubt, when you're making something like a live event, there are so many ways in which your well-orchestrated plans can simply go awry. And in those moments, we've got to get comfortable with throwing on the saddle of improvisation and riding it no matter how hard that bronco bucks. In all honesty, there isn't a day that goes by that at least one of those four things doesn't influence what or how I work. Real artists ship. Cover bands don't change the world. Don't be a cover band. Find your own unique voice. Never kneel at the altar of conformity. Never underestimate your ability to improvise. And although those things resonate with me, the reason I am sharing them with you is in the hope that if at some point you feel your own forward momentum beginning to fail, or you are stymied by circumstances you can't seem to surmount, maybe one of those four quotes will help uplift you so that you can carry on, push through, and find a path to success. I hope something in today's video inspires you and that you found it to be helpful. If so, consider leaving a like or a comment, subscribe to the channel, and when you enable notifications, not only will you find out every single time that I publish, but you will also satiate the fickle and ever-changing YouTube engagement algorithm whatchamacallit.